Many of you who were in for that last session, it was a tough act to follow, as is the governor and President Salovey and of course my boss, the dean. It was the proverbial scene that Johnny Carson used to say, which is to never follow children or animal acts on stage. As this is pretty tough. The jazz combo too is only adds to some of the challenge. But this is such a star-studded room. I want to, of course, congratulate Josh and Tim, as we have in their teams, for pulling this together. But we mentioned 9 years ago, Mary Tanner and John Soderstrom. I was at all 9 of these, but I remember that first one at West Campus when this thing was launched. And Josh, Tim, we never imagined how far this would go. This is extraordinary. So thanks to all of you for being here and for trying to keep some issues fresh. We're going to be looking at some current issues, but you're coming to, we're going to give it the old school try, if you would, this late in the day, because this is, after all, an old school, 322 years old. But as H.L. Mencken said, talking about old universities like this one, or Secretary Summers, another old university we know, okay, 40 years older, he complained that we tend to teach old languages as if they were alive, dead languages as if they were alive, and living languages as if they were dead. One thing we don't need to worry about today is we're going to be dealing with some very lively, some very current issues. But as you heard the term in the last panel, those many of you who are here to hear Brian Elliott and Daniel talk, all three of them said they were spooked about all this new opportunity. Well, what a dreary, scary, ominous opening they've created for us, because it is kind of, many people have used the term in the literature lately, which is everywhere on AI, as being Dickensian. But in fair to Charles Dickens, he did, write A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times as well as the worst of times. So that's what this panel is going to wrestle with, is what we consider to be somewhat Dickensian. As the governor had mentioned, that this panel is something that he's even going to be in the back of the room, so I'll be on best behavior for him. But we're going to have Secretary Summers help kick things off and have a little conversation about some of the larger context, what the economic context means and what we're seeing as we take a look at this as a major transformational wave in technology with convulsive jolts, or is this some sort of an overstated fad, or wrestling with how catastrophic or creative is this, as we then will take a look at our respondents who will join us. Sarah Fay, Managing Director of Glasswing Ventures, and Tarek Sharef, who I'll be introducing as well as the founder and CEO of Metadata Solutions. We'll have a conversation that picks up with whatever loose ends Larry Summers and I create in just moments. I serve as the chairman of Advanced CT, which is Connecticut's Economic Development Authority, a board here. And there are many people who work with us. I see Tim McCoy here of Connecticut Innovations, and many others that know that this state has a very proud trajectory that we're on right now. Taking a look at Connecticut venture capital funding by year, that it's grown the 311% since 2016. We'll take a look at where things are today. The new business formation has been pretty exciting here, has been especially from diverse founders that we're especially proud of, all different business types, but different backgrounds too. And the education quality here, which at least in this building we care a lot about on this campus, but hopefully the whole state does, is number 2 in public education quality, number 3 in state employees with advanced degrees, and 38 in total state colleges, universities. And we're doing better with retaining people in some prime working years than folks would have thought, with the retention and attraction of young talent. However, that's all in general about startups, venture capital, and the excitement and entrepreneurship so many of you represent across life sciences, technology, advanced manufacturing, other fields. When we get to this field of this last panel setup of AI, we see it's a little bit more complicated. In the last month, the New York Times has run 143 articles with AI, most of them on the front page, and ChatGPT in the headline. In fact, 31 just already this past, this week so far. which is incredible. And it's not just the New York Times fascination. The Wall Street Journal, similarly, 204 articles with AI or ChatGPT in the headline. And we did not use, by the way, ChatGPT or AI to pull this up. Stephen Tian did it all by himself. It was faster. Of course, just in the last week alone, the Wall Street Journal's done even more than the New York Times with 47 articles. You think, well, is this a dot-com bomb issue? What's going on here? We see, oh my goodness, we talked about venture capital seconds ago when I was talking about the state specifically, but look at what's happened in the funding which has come in. It's the valuation for pre-money valuation of these new generative AI companies, the value on these deals has doubled to $90 million. Businesses just launched, just been created over last year. We are very happy. Your Secretary Summers, Larry, you're wondering what I was going to give you an opening question. As you know, through all of our years, you don't happen to listen to anything I say, but if you take this one, this is one which would be a teaser, is you see all these kinds of challenges up here, many of which, actually, if not all of these, that you've now helped this country navigate through in various professional life roles. Are we talking about here something which is in the category of these catastrophic events or something very different? So that's the softball question, should you take it? And then, as you know, in today's Washington Post, AI poses risks of extinction on a par with nukes, tech leaders say. And of course, sadly, it's the leaders who are the creators in this space that have brought us this sense of doom and gloom and a sense of anxiety. Just to give a little bit different perspective, I thought I'd talk, and then I will bring the dignity back to the stage. I thought I should get this out of the way before introducing our celebrated guests, is this may help. Let's bring my laptop back up here. He's talked for 15 minutes. Thank you. But still didn't work for him either. I hate it when they just come in and plug it in. Mike?
Hey, Stephen.
You know what? I'm going to spare you oh, there you go. This is just proof that it's not user error. We stumped the star. And now a word from our sponsor is most important thing to do right now. You think it'll work now? Why don't we just go to Secretary Summers and forget about that? Yeah, thank you. It was going to ruin the dignity of the event anyway. It was a clip from The Onion that Larry Summers would have hated following. Larry Summers is the president emeritus of Harvard University. He has been the past 2 decades serving in many senior positions, including Vice President of Development Economics, Chief Economist at the World Bank, Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs, Director of National Economic Council for the Obama administration from 2009 to 2011, Secretary of the Treasury from 1999 to 2001. He received his bachelorate from MIT in 1975, where I think he entered in one field and switched over to economics once he got there, was awarded the PhD in 1982. From Harvard, became one of the youngest individuals to be named a tenured professor at Harvard University. In 1987, Larry became the first scientist ever to receive the Alan T. Waterman Award of the National Science Foundation. In 1993, it was awarded the John Bates Clark Medal, given every 2 years to the outstanding economist under the age of 40. Currently, the Charles Eliot University professor at Harvard University, I've known Larry, although he'll dispute this, since we were 4 years old. I saw him once or twice at the World Bank when Sheryl Sandberg was chasing after him with papers flying all over that she was scooping up, as he was and always has been a great proponent in the advancement of the professional careers of women. And his mom was also quite a renowned economist herself, but somehow found time to join up with my mom in the Philadelphia Area League of Women Voters, where we used to apparently play together. And we were 4 years old, I'm so told. But going through graduate school, we intermittently would have certain potlucks with some other economically oriented graduate students who were better at I think at the chemistry of the meal than either he or I, where I was, I think, at the potluck in charge of the napkins, bringing the. Larry, with that as a setup, and you should be so happy you were spared that undignified opening of the onion, just showing some problems with artificial intelligence. As you take a look at that venture capital data I put up there, and you think of all that capital that's flooding into the VC world, this time last year, we would be rejoicing that there's $25 billion more came in Q1 of 2022 into venture capital. Now, we've seen about $5 billion leave the venture capital world. Should people in this room be worried? And just between you and me, isn't this really the fault of the Fed, Larry?
I think I'm really glad to be at Yale University. And I think I'm pleased to be in dialogue with you 64 years after we played together as look, seriously, I think that one of the really important strengths that the United States has is its universities, and its universities as an export engine, providing education to foreign students, its universities as a driver of progress, and the ways in which American universities cooperate with government, cooperate with the broader society, and cooperate with business are, I think, profoundly important. And I think Yale is to be congratulated for having gatherings like this. I had the privilege of having a conversation not long ago with Governor Lamont about the economic strategy of Connecticut, and Yale as an intellectual driver, particularly through the life sciences, was something that was central in that strategy, and that certainly tracks what I tried to do during my time as president of Harvard. Look, I think there is nothing as important as the combination of markets, science, and technology in driving human progress. I think it is not recognized as much as it should be that about 150 years ago, mankind marked a historic turn. Living standards in London in 1850 were barely different than living standards in Athens in 500 BC. And all of a sudden, with the Industrial Revolution, with a combination of capitalism and technology, the question shifted from would there be progress, would there be limitation from hunger on the size of human populations, to how fast would that progress be? And that was a profound turn. And history has been shaped by the Industrial Revolution, by the subsequent revolutions that have taken place in technology. So what we're part of discussing here is something that is hugely important. And the United States has, more or less from the beginning of that, certainly from the late 18th century on, has been a crucible of progress. And that is why the 20th century was the American century that it was. And for every important issue, will we be protected from pandemics? Will we contain climate change in a way that will enable continued human progress? Will values of liberalism and freedom spread in the world? Or will government by the people, for the people, prove to be an ultimately transient phenomenon? The success of the American project will be central. So the stakes in all of this are very, very high. Look, it is the nature of capitalist economic life that there are cyclical elements, that there are periods of optimism, that periods of optimism, when sustained for substantial intervals, lead to periods of over-optimism, and that over-optimism is corrected. Though that over-optimism left in its wake the Trans-Pacific Railroad, when it was British over-optimism in the 19th century, left in its wake the abundant fiber optic cable that drove the creation of the internet when it took place at the end of the 1990s. And I don't doubt that there will be, that there have already been excesses, but I also don't doubt that there will be an enormous amount that is positive. So no, I don't blame the Fed for the fact that there's less venture capital. I blame the fact that we set off an inflation, and that inflation needed to be controlled if there wasn't to be more pain and more disruption down the road for the business cycle. But ultimately, history's not going to remember exactly what recession we do or do not have in late 2023 or mid 2024. That's not going to be something that high school AP history students are going to be studying in 2060. They might be studying whether America contains the Peronist tendency that we've now seen lies within our politics. They might be studying what the result of this AI revolution is. I have to say that I am ultimately a practical optimist about it. I do not I say practical and I say optimist. And here's why. This is incredibly sophisticated, incredibly complicated stuff. But what it is fill in the blank. What it is extrapolation. Take all the times you've seen a sequence of characters or a sequence of words, and what usually comes next, fill that in, then do the same thing again. And if you do that in a sufficiently extraordinary pattern matching way, you can do remarkable things. You can answer people's questions in ways that seem reasonable. You can take bits of a picture and continue them to look things like Van Gogh. You can take 4 seconds fragments of songs and extend them into music that seems very real. But what you're doing is you're filling in the blank and extrapolating. You're not understanding and comprehending. But you can still produce remarkable things by filling in the blank. That's the lesson here. And I frankly read that very optimistically. I read that as there are going to be an incredible number of domains where things can be done better, faster, cheaper than they were done before. Tutoring students, for example. It used to be considered a fundamental skill to use a slide rule. It used to be considered fundamentally important that you learn how, with a pencil and paper, to calculate a square root. And then there were calculators, and you could kind of grasp the idea of a square root. You didn't need to learn the algorithm for doing it with pencil and paper.
So, perfect example. When we were still in graduate school, I don't know if anybody here except the two of us in the room are old enough to remember the Bomar brain that came out even before HP had a advanced, sophisticated calculator built into it. And the Harvard Business School at that time banned its use instead of trying to figure out how to embrace it. As you take a look at these different opportunities for technology—
Harvard Business School was wrong when it did that.
Well, yeah, and as you can see how people are approaching generative AI and the classroom, as somebody who has looked at these huge, and by the way, you did all hear, I guess it's not the Fed's fault. He doesn't say if there's going to be easing yet, but surely inflation indices are all down pretty much across the board, but we won't push him on it. But he also did say he's not spooked by the new technologies.
Jeff, you're giving your view on inflation, and you're entitled to your view, but you're wrong. The right way to understand inflation is that the economy was massively stimulated in 2021, that we turned a 2% inflation country into a 5% inflation country.
How did that happen?
And then—
You said we were going to have stagflation for a decade of low growth and low inflation.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't, Jeff.
Well, who said stagflation?
I didn't. What I said was we were going to turn a 2% inflation country into a 5% inflation country, and that it was going to be hard to get it back without having a substantial recession, and I think we will at some point. Layered on top of that was all kinds of transient stuff. What happened in used cars, what happened at ports, what happened with oil. And so for a while, 5% inflation was 8% inflation. And then when the price of oil mean reverted, 5% inflation might look like it was less than 5% inflation. So there's a lot of transient fluctuation
this time last year,
around that 5%, and people like you made the mistake of extrapolating the decline in transient inflation into some kind of enduring progress.
We have to talk about AI and the impact on the professional workforce in universities, but and I was kind of hoping you wouldn't take the bait I threw out there, but you had to correct me. So I'll respond. is every commodity is down, whether or not it's fertilizer, whether or not it's copper, whether or not it's, this time last year, JP Morgan said oil would be roughly $400 a barrel. It's right now $67 a barrel. It's barely even crossed 100 briefly. Everything is down, and most of the Fed is looking at inflation indicators that don't consider half of the economy. It's not built into core PC. You don't have the core consumer price index doesn't consider food and fuel. That's where all the reductions have been, and it's pretty remarkable.
Jeff, how about we make a deal? My knowledge of CEO leadership causes me to not talk extensively about that topic, and you might consider a similar approach with respect to inflation, very respectfully.
Okay, we won't inflate the discussion anymore. I'll consider that a draw.
Quit while you can.
What do you, as you take a look at, and I was just with our friend Walter Isaacson recently, and he was quoting one of the many wise statements you've made on this front, because even though the CEO leadership is not your expertise, perhaps, and maybe economics is not mine, just between us, artificial intelligence is not either of ours. However, you have authentic intelligence, which is so much more important than just artificial intelligence. And as you look at the authentic intelligence issue here, you have seen that there's displacement. And as what Walter was referencing, is that it's rare in history, as you took a look at the Industrial Revolution examples you gave, that you have highly skilled workers. The displacement of loom workers and some others was the rare exception. Generally, it's been lower skilled workers displaced. Now we see at least a lot of anxiety that's out there in the media in the last few months, last few weeks, last few hours, about what this means for professional workforce and what it means for universities. Thoughts?
Look, I think there's an element of AI is coming for the cognitive class. Which is going to be displaced first? Doctors taking in a lot of test results and making a diagnosis, or nurses holding a patient's hand before they receive a painful procedure? Which is going to be displaced first by AI? Someone sitting in front of a screen, seeing a pattern, and reacting to a headline with a buy or sell order, or a salesman creating a relationship that causes someone to be loyal to a particular commercial institution? Which is going to be displaced first? An editor turning ungraceful prose into more graceful prose, or someone who's able to produce poetry? I think in all three of those cases, it's going to be what is today the better paid, more highly respected position that is going to be threatened more by AI than the less highly paid, less respected position. And so I think we are going to see over time some important inversions. There was a time in the United States when a barber was a more respected, higher class person than a doctor, because a barber really knew how to cut your hair, and a doctor didn't know how to make you feel better. And so that was why it was that way. Well, as what AI does changes the value that particular categories of skill can add, I think there's going to be a change in favor of those who work with their hands rather than those who work with their brains. I think the relative importance of EQ, which I don't think AI is going to be able to emulate, is going to rise relative to the importance of IQ, where AI can already ace the tests. I mean, think about where it is that AI now completely exceeds humanity. Playing chess or playing Go. And think about the characteristics that you associate with those activities. They are the supremely cognitive characteristics. So I think it is going to, over time, lead to very substantial changes in a lot of what have been the traditional hierarchies of society. I think that's okay.
Well,
I think that's in many ways going to be progress. I suspect it may well have egalitarian rather than inegalitarian impacts. But again, remember, it's fill in the blank. It's not going to take everything over. It's not going to be able to formulate new creative plans to take over the world because it is fill in the blank. And so I'm up. I think it's going to generate a lot of change. There are going to be people who are better off, and there are going to be people who are worse off. But I think that's the way it always is with technology, and I am ultimately very much an optimist about what this will all mean.
The differential effect on displacement will be important to master, and I'm so glad to hear someone trained, of course, with expert rational analysis and deductive logic, that you also, of course, appreciate inductive EQ and interpersonal behavior, which brings you back into my court. But that is the differentiating quality here. We probably should, because I'm trying to avoid Josh's eye contact here, to bring up our discussants to this keynote. But just before we do, as we see in the front page of the Wall Street Journal, with this petition signed by several hundred leaders in this space, including the chatbot leaders and creators calling for government regulation, as they did in Congress 2 weeks ago. As somebody who's expert in trying to figure out how to create the guide rules that bring safety without suppressing creativity, do you see a role for government regulation here on this front?
You shrewdly pointed out, Jeff, that neither of us were experts in this. And I hesitate to say that there's no need for government regulation in a domain where I don't have complete expertise. And it seems to me any responsible government has to be trying to make itself knowledgeable and thinking through all the aspects of this. What I would say when I read that letter, what I confess I did think of is that government regulation often benefits the regulated. And that often one of the major functions of government regulation, in fact, is to create barriers to entry. The old CAB, when airfares and air routes were regulated, made it almost impossible to start a new airline. The old FPC made it almost impossible to build new pipelines. The old ICC worked enormously to the benefit of existing railroads and existing and existing power companies. The regulation in finance is not directed at making it easy to start a fintech. If anything, it erects a barrier to new approaches to the provision of financial services. And so I couldn't help but wonder when I read that whether there wasn't some aspect of those who were currently in the lead hoping to get into a room with government to make a set of rules for how the system was going to work. And I didn't think that those rules were going to be designed to facilitate maximum freedom for Yale undergraduates developing new technologies who had not yet found their place in the sun. So my life experience tells me to be pretty skeptical about people asking to be regulated by the government. And whenever somebody wanted to be regulated by me when I was in the government, I had a tendency to reach for my wallet. So I think one has to be a little bit careful here. At the same time, obviously, when you have serious, thoughtful people engaged in an activity saying that it needs attention, you should pay attention. But I kind of think that if war is too important to leave to generals, and it is, and if education is too important to leave entirely to professors, I do think we need to think carefully about how we proceed in this area as a society.
Very
and I think
wise.
we also need, and I'll just say one last thing, I think we also need to recognize that the United States is one of many countries in the world, and that if we were to choose self-restraint as our approach, we could not assume that all others would emulate that approach. And for others to have national champions and for us to have national dialogues would not seem to me to be an optimal strategy for preserving America's place in the world, which I think has meant so much to the world.
That second caveat, of course, is an important one that I'm sure some in the room have thought of, but not everybody has wrestled to the ground. The first caveat, I don't think many of you or we have talked about much before in any of the discourse and all those articles up there, Larry, and I think it's a very important point that ICC and the Civil Aeronautics Board and even the FCC, Theodore Vail, in the early part of the last century, the creator of AT&T, called it destructive competition. There are 140 phone companies, and again, all got consolidated into two. That's a very good set of caveats. But whether or not, who would have thought that Larry Summers is a laissez-faire, free market, pure economist? You've heard it here first. I'd like to bring up our panel of experts in AI to see if they have the same faith in free enterprise as those who spent their time there. Sarah Fay is Managing Director of Glasswing Ventures, leading investments in marketing technology, digital B2B marketplaces. Sarah has led investments in Narrative IO and several pre-seed startups. Sarah has more than 2 decades of experience in building and leading companies in advertising and media industry, a 3-time successful CEO. She's known as an innovator who's led the charge in the adoption of new forms of media such as digital, mobile, search, social, and programmatic. Under Sarah's leadership, Carrot was the first major media agency to merge digital and traditional capabilities, offering fully integrated strategies. As CEO of Isobar North America, she built the business to $100 million in revenue in 6 years, which involved successful execution of several acquisitions of specialists through that period of time. Given her leadership and experience, she served on quite a number of boards in this space. I won't read this list, but it's more than a dozen over time that she's covered in this exact space. and extremely well decorated with some 30, 40 accolades for her work from Media All-Star Ad Week, top 100 most influential people in media, Fast 50 from Fast Company, Ad Tech Awards, Women to Watch, Ad Age, and thanks so much for joining us, Sarah. Tarek Sharef is something not on your bio, is our surveillance tells us, actually came to the country as an immigrant at age 6. If you don't mind, even though it wasn't in our prep, I would love you to, if we get to it, to talk to us a little about your history coming here, and even the role Yale may have played in any of that. He's the founder of Metadata, a co-founder of, which is a life science healthcare sector company within the Dassault Systems board portfolio now. Over the span of 20 years, in his role as chairman and CEO, Tarek has led Metadata from startup, becoming one of the leading global, not one of the leading, it is the leading. What are you so humble about here? You have half the industry in cloud-based solutions to life sciences industry. Clinical work, you know, probably there's a very good chance if you had a vaccine in the last couple of years, it was benefited of the result of his AI on the clinical trial development work. Metadata is the most used platform for clinical trials around the world, powering tens of thousands of clinical trials with millions of patients. Metadata is now redefining the patient experience in clinical trials, helping customers use the power of data and AI to bring safer drugs to market more quickly. He's got 35 years of leadership experience in healthcare, tech, and finance. Prior to Metadata, he co-managed equity funds on various public and private businesses. He has a BA in economics from Yale and Columbia Business School, but a good guy anyway. And co-chair of the Partnership Fund for New York, and focused also on a lot of non-for-profit boards, some in the healthcare space. Sarah, if we could just come to you, is when we talked on the phone, you talked about a couple specific examples of AI in use that I thought would be very illustrative, because you had a lot to do with bringing them to life. Verisyn, use in supply chains. You referred to Black Kite in cybersecurity, and LabViva in life science procurement, narrative streaming company. Any one of those or two of those you could tell us something about the role of AI that's different that people in the room wouldn't have known about?
Sure. Well, so just to give you a little context, Glasswing Ventures, which is the firm I'm a part of, established itself in 2016 to take advantage of the coming wave of AI, which at that point in time, we needed to explain why that was a broad enough thesis. And, you know, of course, today we don't anymore, but the area of AI that we saw ourselves, you know, making a name in is more vertical AI strategies. So you know, not the big large language models that you see, but where you can really have a practical impact on vertical industries, and or building the infrastructure for AI. And being part of a data company, you would know this, but data is the lifeblood for any algorithm. The reality is that it's not easy to get your hands on data. It's not easy to make data move and to be able to manipulate it in the ways you want it to. And so some of the very first opportunities are things like narrative, which allows data supply to be bought and sold at the raw level in real time. And that may not sound exciting, but the reality is that the old way is to buy segments of data. It takes a very long time. It's a manual process. You know, it could be 6 months from the time that you want to buy data to the time you're implementing it. This is a platform where you can buy data with a credit card and be applying it to your business model.
Should we be worried about, since that sounds harmless and helpful, anything that would fit Larry's scenario of optimism? How about Black Kite and cybersecurity? Is there anything there we should be scared about just between us?
Well, I mean, we should all be very scared. I mean, the fact is that AI is in the hands of the bad guys too. And hacking is a real problem. In fact, it's completely on the rise. If you're a Fortune 500 company, you're being hacked about 50 times an hour. And companies really need to take all the steps they possibly can to make sure their data is protected. This is part of a human right too. If a company has your data card, your credit card, you know, they have to promise that they're protecting your data. Black Kite is a company that uses AI to simulate hacking of a network. So it can quickly give a grade to a company, it can let them know where their weaknesses are, and get them to, you know, answers faster in terms of what they need to do to their network. This is important in the digital economy where more companies are integrating with other networks. They're doing M&A. They're, you know, creating more backdoors to their network. So Black Kite is it's one of our darlings. They're really on a steep trajectory in terms of growth. And that is unfortunately because companies really need to worry about cybersecurity.
Well, and those life stages of the sector are fascinating, and the role of AI has in its infancy in projecting that forward for such huge transformation that it's allowing more capability to fight the bad guys. And before we go to Tarek on life stage issues, just to talk about how he got here and where this company is going, I don't want to miss the moment just to ask you, if you didn't mind, you take a look at the macho world of a lot of these startup enterprises and these AI conferences, and who's quoted in all the newspaper articles, in the Washington Post article, the New York Times article, and the Wall Street Journal article on this particular petition. There's not a single woman mentioned in there. You think a look at fewer than 9% of women entrepreneurs getting funded, and I know that the economists would say, well, you know, how many applied for the fund? But still, the numbers aren't good. What was it like coming in? Or was it inconsequential? It's all merit-based, it didn't matter.
Yeah, the numbers are terrible, in fact. Less than 2% of capital go to female founders. And in terms of check writers in the VC world, it's a little better. It's getting a little bit better. It's sort of in the realm of 17% of check writers, but it's a long way off from 50%. I co-lead the Boston chapter for an organization called All Raise. All Raise is dedicated to the mission of putting more capital into the hands of women. I believe there are myriad thought leaders in the AI category who are women or people of color, and it is a matter of dialing up those.
Sometimes just being imaginative. At the time that Facebook was going public, Larry's really brilliant protege wasn't initially considered for the board, even though she was chief operating officer at the time and possibly already named president. It took a lot of public outrage for the board of Facebook at that point to remind them that there are a lot of great women in technology, which they did, to bring onto that board. Tara, coming in from outside the country, it's also sort of an American dream story, isn't it, or am I overstating it?
No, I think it actually is. I feel very privileged to have had the life I've had so far. So my parents did immigrate to the United States from Egypt, and half Egyptian, half German, looking for a better life for my sister and I. And because of Yale's generous policy toward giving scholarships, I was able to go to Yale fully on scholarship, and then spent, because I always had it in my head that I wanted to be in the finance world, spent about 15 years and tried to figure out what my role and what my future could be. And then one day, fortuitously, met these two brilliant young guys who were starting a company in the healthcare industry, in life sciences in particular. This is back in '99, and they were looking at what was happening in clinical trials. As you know, first you discover a molecule, then you have to run clinical trials where you try the therapy on a patient, and then you look ultimately for approval from a regulatory body, and patients get the therapy. Well, they had this brilliant idea that maybe you could use this thing called the internet to collect and manage all the data to make clinical trials much more efficient. And I happened to meet them just through happenstance. It was a love story. We were supposed to meet for an hour. We met for 5 hours. And over a course of 2 months, we kept talking to each other and spitballing ideas. And eventually I moved in with them into their office, and we started this company called Medidata. And sometimes life throws some curveballs at you, but they make you stronger and they make you better. The internet bubble just blew up right after we started our business, and you had 3 founders who had never started a business before.
You
But
founded in 1999 and then just went
late
into,
99,
yeah.
and then you know, the nuclear winter hit. I remember sitting in a VC's office trying to explain what we were doing, and he looked at us and said, "You should do something else. You know, this is not going to work. You guys have no experience." But we persevered. We managed to scrape by living on credit cards. You know, kind of did it the old-fashioned way. And by the way, did it in New York, not in Silicon Valley and not in Boston. But used credit cards. You know, there were days where I would run to the bank to deposit a check because a customer had just paid us just to make payroll the next day, and all these kind of crazy stories. But because we raised very little capital in the early days, it was, by the time we went public in 2009, we'd raised $13 million in total, but still had $10 million on our balance sheet. And our business at the time was about $140 million in revenue run rate business. So we did that on $3 million of capital, which I know sounds crazy in today's environment, but it is the way, you know, we got very smart about how we thought about our business model. We were, you know, at the same time that
I thought you did it with 13 million, 3 million?
13 million in total that we raised, but we had 10 million
Oh, yeah.
public. So
And you built $1 billion business.
today it's it's well north of $1 billion in revenue.
Are AI people overfunded today?
I'm not gonna. I think quite frankly, a lot of companies are overfunded.
So you
not
kind of
just AI
share
companies.
Larry's
Like,
optimism that maybe there's something to this adversity to sort things out so we don't...
it makes you, you know, we had to think out of the box about our business model. We were the first vertical SaaS company, cloud-based company, because we couldn't afford to do it how everybody else did it. We had to do it differently. Same thing in how we developed our technology. You know, it was a business model and a technology that was built on necessity, where we really had a vision for where we thought the industry would go. You know, collect data on the internet. That was a crazy idea back then. People used to use paper, and they would fax in the paper with the data on it, and you had all kinds of quality issues, and we helped to solve those issues.
Are you worried about the what are some of the contraindicators of the success, some of the byproducts of ethical dilemmas?
As it relates to AI?
Yeah.
So I'm sort of, I have a practical perspective on this. I do believe in innovation, obviously, and I think private companies, technology, they're the ones who are willing to take risks. They're going to push, they're going to push innovation. In the healthcare space, we're already using AI.
25 assisting surgical procedures in operations and
Yeah,
tracking.
But we're doing more than that. We're creating digital twins of patients. We were just discussing this. And here's a really ethically important point. So in clinical trials, usually the gold standard is you want to try your therapy on a group of patients, and you want to have a comparator. You want to compare to some subset of patients who aren't getting that therapy. Maybe they're getting the standard of care, or they're getting sugar water, whatever it may be. Well, in some very rare diseases, and we had this recently happen in glioblastoma, which is a horrible disease, some patient in your trial is not going to receive a therapy that could potentially save their lives. Well, in our case, we were able to, because we have more than half of the industry using our platform, collecting a lot of data, and about a decade ago, we started asking for the rights to use that scientific data. We're able to simulate a patient using all this very clean and very deep data. And you know, you do have to, there's a lot of data out there, but it needs to be clean, especially when you're making decisions about people's lives. In this case, we're able to take that comparator arm of a clinical trial we were working on, and instead of having to enroll 150 patients into that trial to be in the comparator arm, they only needed 50 patients. We provided another 100 patients that were digitally created. So there was a really important ethical point that happened, as well as an economic point for the customer who came to us. So there are examples where I think it works in our favor, but I do also believe that, you know, one of the questions I have is who's steering this bus as we think about the future of AI? Where where are we going to put up some of the, maybe not regulatory
Oh, come
guidelines?
on. You disagree with Larry. You're just afraid of him.
No, I'm not afraid of Larry.
Yeah,
It's not,
but
maybe
you're-
I should be, but the point is,
You're
no,
in favor of regulations. You want some
no, I
guidelines.
never, I actually didn't say I'm in favor of regulation. I'm in favor of having a dialogue and putting guidelines in place. That doesn't have to be a government putting in regulations. That can also be conversation with amongst academics. It can be a set of rules, call it, maybe you don't like the UN, but where's the UN to discuss what the future of AI and technology is on our humanity? That's the thing I'm most
How about
concerned
Larry's
about.
fear, if it's not about the regulatory capture of distorting regulatory agencies to serve the interests that promoted the regulation, how about Larry's second concern, though, that we can be good guys in parts of the world where they're going to ignore that collaborative agreement? I mean, Sarah, you've been looking at associations. You've been part of a couple of associations. WBA, I think, is one of them. Can you explain what that is and what you're doing to try to set up voluntary standards? And then we'll come back to Larry and see if he thinks that's convincing.
So Glasswing is a signatory to PRI, that is a UN organization. PRI represents 121 trillion in assets under management in terms of all the signatories they have. That is 1/2 of the world's institutional capital. Now, I'm not saying that all of it is activated toward the initiatives of PRI, but organizations like that and the WBA, World Benchmarking Alliance, are organizing investors to ask the difficult questions to the biggest developers of AI in the world. Regulation may or may not happen, but it certainly won't come fast enough. I mean, even if regulation gets underway and we identify what it is we want to regulate, I think that companies they have to look at their own objectives in a bespoke way and just carefully consider what the ramifications are of what they're developing.
And that consideration would be for voluntary guidelines of responsible conduct.
Yes, and so what PRI and WBA want is for these companies to have policies and to just be able to speak publicly about their positions. Now, WBA just ran a year-long initiative to talk to the top 200 developers of AI. You would recognize all the names. And some of them are incredibly sophisticated about this. Certainly Microsoft or IBM, Facebook, they all have policies.
Are you worried about the international extension of this?
Yeah. I mean, 60% of the companies didn't get back to us. So, you know, there's work to do there. But I think, you know, getting on the phone with these companies and asking them the tough questions with a few trillion on the line, you know, means they can't just ignore people, you know, who care about this, who might be their shareholders.
Larry, are you worried about this limits to voluntary association here? I mean, when I go, and you don't have to comment on the following because it's going to be way over the edge for and most anybody sensible in this room, is when I go to China and hold forums talking about environmental issues, candidly, we have to use Western companies as the foil. Even under Hu Jintao, with Chinese academics in the room, we couldn't use Chinese company examples of sustainability issues. It was just much easier to take a look at misconduct of Western companies in China. Is that some of these things are harder to extend globally. Do you think that there's anything Pollyanna-ish here about us holding ourselves to, you're worried about exalted, formal, legal, compliant regulatory standards, but how about even voluntary associations? Is you know, a good business council going to translate internationally? Better Business Bureau.
My father was an economist, and he was a kind of Franklin Roosevelt, Adlai Stevenson liberal. And I remember his saying to me when I was a kid that the Better Business Bureau was really the Better for Business Bureau, because the real idea was, by saying that there was the Better Business Bureau, They could say, well, you just call the Better Business Bureau and we'll solve your problems. And therefore, the government doesn't have to get involved in regulating businesses. But none of the businesses ever really wanted to hassle the other businesses very much. And they all mostly scratched each other's back and worked for the image of business without solving consumer problems. And he had a very deeply cynical view about it. And
I mean, you look at peer review in certain professions, it's like that.
And I think he probably overdid it. It is true that it's estimated, these are very old figures, so I'm out of date. But when I read about this, I read that it was estimated that 9% of physicians in the United States were addicted to a substance. With 600,000 physicians, that works out to about 50,000 physicians, and that only 1% and that only 500 physicians lost their licenses each year. So less than 1% of those who were addicted to something were losing their licenses. So I'm a little skeptical about voluntarism, and I worry a little bit about investors. You know, Norway owns roughly 4% of every company on the New York Stock Exchange. BlackRock, Vanguard, and Fidelity, between them, own close to 10% of every company on the New York Stock Exchange. You know, I don't know what they really know about figuring all this out. I think all things considered, I'd probably rather have elected officials be accountable for regulation. So I'm not hugely, I don't think of this stuff as counterproductive, and so I think it's a good thing to do. I think dialogue that surfaces issues is welcome, but I also worry when all the CEOs of an industry get together for dinner to have a common discussion of the industry's problems. I somehow feel that sometimes the rest of us are on the menu. So I think there's something, I kind of believe in pluralism and letting many flowers bloom, and so I'm for all of this, but I do worry that there is a tendency on the part of business to not be entirely neutral in judging itself. And
Sarah,
I'll just tell one little story here, you know, and no, stop. I remember when I was Treasury Secretary, we, the Clinton administration, were unenthusiastic about steel tariffs. And because steel tariffs were going to be inflationary and steel tariffs were going to raise the costs of the products that used steel, and we were just unenthusiastic. And all these CEOs would say, way to go, you know, we want lower priced steel, it's ridiculous. I said, well, why don't you say that publicly? They said, oh, we can't say that because, you know, we're part of the business roundtable with Hank. Hank was the CEO of one of the steel companies that was part of the roundtable, and they said, well, we can't do that to Hank. Well, all right, I understand you can't do that to Hank, but if you can't do that to Hank, then like we should probably regard you as a bit more of a social club than as like America's friends, fighting for better policy. So I'm fine with this as part of a kind of varied ecology for solving problems, but I think we need to not get ourselves overly enamored.
Sarah, this is an attack on the Better for Business Bureau model that you have in mind, right? Is that what's the defense of the voluntary association where it's well intended and a very low bar is set, and it doesn't translate globally if it had teeth in it?
I don't think it's going to necessarily solve the world's problems that investors are asking companies hard questions. Certainly the PRI, their first focus is in AI. They do have, a track on digital human rights and things like that. I would say their primary concern is sustainability. Have they changed behavior? I think that in some cases they have. I mean, there are investors that invest in Brazil who are very influential voices on what's happening with the rainforest. To give you an example on digital human rights, it's widely held that using facial recognition to surveil crowds is a violation of human rights.
Right.
And this organization got Facebook to speak out against their development of facial recognition, which is, I think, pretty big. Seeing that Facebook is like one of the world's best in facial recognition, that they will not use facial recognition to surveil crowds. So, I mean, it's baby steps, little by little.
I think we're agreeing that it's it's part of an ecology, and there are a lot of parts that are constructive, but one shouldn't go, oh, because it's there, everything's going to be okay.
So the industry can't. The industry
and
can't
Tarek,
self-regulate, right? That's a reality. I think that there's always a question of unintended consequences. When social media became prominent, we didn't know what the implications would be on our ability to connect to people, on mental health issues, all these things that are coming up. We didn't realize that an algorithm was going to isolate us by choosing the news that it's going to feed us without our control over it, right? Those are the kind of things we need to be discussing. Whether we regulate it or not is a different point, but I think as you think about the future of AI, there are so many are humans augmented with that kind of power can make better decisions, and I'm all in favor of that.
Stephen,
we don't want to just drift into this without recognizing the risks associated with it as well.
Stephen, we shouldn't tell him that we taped the phone call where he said there's a role for government, right? We won't bring that up.
There is a role for government.
I got it.
No. I'm just saying, but just blindly regulating it isn't going to solve any kind of problem as well. I think it needs to be it's a much bigger issue.
They're not so sure about the role for government. Government, it's not just to hold a commission hearing, it's to come out with a ruling. How many people think there's a role for government here? Just raise your hand. Oh. Wow, that looks like 74%.
Not the only. They're not the only. They're not the judge, the jury, and the executioner.
Oh, you don't admire these people?
No, I'm talking about government.
Oh, okay.
No, I admire all these people.
Good.
Well, at least most of them.
I was just going to say, to the Secretary's point earlier, there are good and bad things happening with the development of AI. Obviously, very good things for health. Bad things when the bad guys have it in their hands that we have to worry about. There was a philosopher named Neil Postman, who is a technology philosopher, who said that every new technology has a Faustian bargain. And the greater the power of the technology, the bigger the consequences to the negative. And even if you think about, social media, we're all in touch with our relatives and things like that. There are great consequences of staying in touch, and
exactly.
but obviously, our kids are suffering mental health consequences.
Here's the big frustration I have right now is I unfortunately made contact with Josh a minute ago, and he's letting me know that you guys can't all stay here till 7 tonight. Some of you have to leave by 6, because this panel has so much wisdom on where past AI, not necessarily generative AI, but where AI perhaps was too broad. I know you have some views about Watson as being focused, or who's displaced, and you have some views about perhaps where Google might be really quite imperiled with Microsoft Brasilia. These guys could keep us, any one of these panelists could keep us here, obviously in the role of government and university life. With Larry, you guys could keep us here, of course, till midnight. So I just want to say, I'm so apologetic that, that Josh gave us such a great panel. that we just can't answer all the great questions that are out there, but they can, but we just don't have the time to cover it all. Unless you guys had a quick closing comment each, we sadly have to wrap. Is there something that is incredibly painful that we haven't touched that you wanted to make sure we don't miss? Sarah?
Painful. No.
Or promising.
I mean, look, I invest in AI. I'm really excited about what it brings. And it's, it's not just that AI does what a human can do. It does what no human can do. I think it makes people superhuman. And a lot of people think of it in terms of like the jobs it will take away. Oh, it's going to contribute to profits because we'll need fewer people. What about the revenue it can create? Like, forget about, the jobs it takes away. This can make our companies produce so much more. It can really, maybe, we'll see, I don't know if the secretary would agree with me, but create a lift to the economy that is much needed. And of course, same as the internet, the companies who get on board will be the ones who win. Others will be made irrelevant. So there's going to be winners and losers. But I feel.
It's very interesting, Sarah. The great tech investor that many in the room know is a Yale alum, Roger McNamee, complains about the space that nobody has a business model that's profitable. But you're reminding us. We just had a great panelist from from Amazon up on stage here on the prior panel. It took them 20 years to be profitable, but it's a great innovation forward that sometimes it's going to take a little while for these new models to pay off. But Tarek, there's something that Sarah said, I don't know that you completely buy in about that this technology can do what people can't do. Don't you still hold to something that Larry said? There are also certain things that people can do in terms of empathy and judgment.
I completely agree. But by the way, it took us 10 years to get profitable. Just so.
10 years? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so less than 20 years. I think a couple of things. As Sarah was speaking, I was thinking about the panel. Famously, Socrates said that when writing came about, that he didn't really like writing. He didn't want things being written down because we would lose our ability to remember. And he was kind of right and wrong in the sense that people don't storytell the way they did a couple of thousand years ago, but think about what writing did for the world. I feel the same way about AI. There's so much potential that comes with it, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are also downsides to it. And I think having a dialogue around that and having the guardrails in place that allow us to use it in a way that is beneficial to mankind, while trying to at least mitigate some of the risks, I think that's actually very important. And I do, my concern around, and I've made no secret of it, is I've been talking to the Yale administration a little bit about this, is I worry that our focus on technology, and that focus has been ongoing for quite some time, is in some ways changing what it means to be a human. It's depriving, or it's pulling away from our humanity. And I was really struck by what you were saying earlier, because yeah, that connection, holding somebody's hand, the empathy, doing things for other people. AI is not, I don't know what happens 200 years from now if we're still on this planet, but right now, AI is not capable of those kinds of emotions, right? And they are what make us human, that connection to the world, that connection to each other. If we lose that, I think that's a shame for society. For humanity.
That brings us back to where Larry opened us up on several fronts, and some of it being the role of the university. And you have poignantly raised the challenge to us. A blind pursuit of technology would be problematic. This university, at the time of the Industrial Revolution that Larry was talking about before, had one of the world's great engineering schools. It disappeared largely, and now that it's rebuilt hopefully with the Lux et Veritas spirit that we pulled together all the other parts of this university to work with our new engineering. We didn't have a business school then either, but that's a very exciting time. And Larry, thank you for opening up this session for us. And I wonder if you have a closing thought. I should mention that Sarah has, as far as I know, well, she's some Connecticut roots, no Yale ties, incredibly generous to join. And Tarek, you win the Distance Award. You came here from London for this award. But Larry, you came in, behind enemy lines into an enemy camp, and it's above and beyond the call. There's nothing of remote self-interest in this. Josh and I still can't believe you accepted the invitation. We're so grateful too. So thank you for the close.
I was born at the Yale New Haven Hospital. The world's gotten to be a better place in the 68 years since I was born. I believe it will get to be a better place over the next 68 years, and that AI will be one of the significant contributors to that. And a lesson I learned a long time ago was it's much more important to think about what you're for than to think about what you're against. Mm-hmm. And I think that's helpful in thinking about approaches to these various complex problems. And I think what we've seen here is the kind of dialogue that takes place in many different places, out of which greater understandings and ultimately more progress comes, because it's ultimately ideas and leaders, the two products of great universities that shape the world. And it's kind of dark in this room, but it's sunny outside. And that tells us something very important about how we should view the future.
Well, thanks for all the light all three of you brought to this room. The light is a double-edged sword, of course. On the challenging side, right moments after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I bring it up just because of the apocalyptic writing in today's Washington Post with chatbot founders and other tech leaders in generative AI going back that far to nuclear horror. He quoted from the Bhagavad Gita saying, if the radiance of 1,000 suns, this is Robert Oppenheimer, said this right afterwards, if the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. I become death, the shatterer of worlds. When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and you do it. And you argue what to do about it only after you had your technical success. That's the way it was with the atom bomb. In some sort of crude sense, no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can extinguish. The physicists have now known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose. We obviously, in life sciences and social media and other fields involved here, that people have experienced this before, once again. But the other side of it is, since we did say this is the best of times, worst of times, the sense of promise. This is anything but a cynical panel. I'm the closest thing to being cynical here. This is a very constructive, upbeat panel. Is a classmate of the governor's in mine, RFK, and not RFK Jr., by the way, was the classmate, but I meant RFK, his dad, said that some people see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. And I think that's the spirit of this panel, is how to make things better. I want to thank all of you. Josh, thank you for assembling this panel. Great job, everybody.